Hello, brave, wonderful soul friends. Welcome to another Conversations with Kristin, where part of your day where you get to dive deep into exploring consciousness from the inside out. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about traumatic response and what that means and what that can look like. And so first off, traumatic response happens along a spectrum. It's not just you're fully lucid and grounded or you're in a traumatic response. It happens along a spectrum, and there's a lot of different things that can happen at different points along that spectrum. And so the spectrum of traumatic response, and I talk about this actually in my Restoring Consciousness toolkit, and I talk about the spectrum of traumatic response, and I talk about subconscious parts and what traumatic response they're most likely to be connected to. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. So the spectrum of traumatic response, at the end of more grounded and lucid, there's fully lucid, grounded, and present. And then it goes lucid and present, but not fully grounded. And that's a normal part response. And then the next one down is attach response. And the next one along the spectrum of traumatic response is flight response. The next one is fight response. The next one is freeze response. The next one is fold response. And then the last one is a blackout, where there's multiple traumatic responses being activated simultaneously. And so the spectrum of traumatic response can be viewed from two different perspectives. One is the responses in the body, where it's completely neurophysiological, happening beyond all direct and immediate awareness. The other aspect of this spectrum is the times where it's happening in the mind through thoughts. And only when those thoughts are responded to or acted on does there become a physical, neurophysiological traumatic response. And so the first one I mentioned, where it's completely physical, completely unconscious, completely within the neurophysiology, that happens in relation to activations within the nervous system. And according to the polyvagal theory, there's 5 states of autonomic arousal, or 5 states within the autonomic nervous system in relation to the vagus nerve. We all have 4 vagus nerves, 2 on each side, a dorsal and a ventral vagal nerve. And so within the autonomic nervous system, there's 5... 1 second, everybody. Okay, back to it. So along the... yeah. Yeah. Along the autonomic nervous system, there's 5 states of activation. There's immobilization with fear. Immobilization. Well, let me explain each one as I go. There's immobilization with fear. This is the fold response. This is where the body is feigning death. And this is the most likely response when there's trauma during early childhood. So immobilization with fear. And then there's immobilization without fear. And this is a stable, lucid place, and this is the place where intimacy is most likely to happen. And the next state along this spectrum of autonomic activation, according to the polyvagal theory, is social engagement. And this is like your average, everyday chit-chatting, hanging out, socially engaged. You're relaxed, you're calm, you're engaged. The next one along the spectrum is mobilization without fear. And this is where you're most likely to be like playful and competitive and stuff like that. And then the last one along the spectrum is mobilization with fear. And this is your fight, flight response and activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And so we've got the sympathetic over here, the dorsal vagal over here, and the ventral vagal here, and then some overlap combinations. So this is the spectrum of autonomic arousal according to the polyvagal theory. And so going back to the spectrum of traumatic response, this has to do with activation in the nervous system. So it's happening beyond all direct and immediate awareness. It's happening completely unconsciously. It's happening within the neurophysiology. It's affecting things like heart rate and respiration and a lot of the unconscious bodily processes through the nervous systems, okay? So we've got the spectrum of traumatic response. And when it's physical, it's happening in the body through the nervous system along this spectrum of activation. the fully grounded, normal, attach, flight, fight, freeze, fold, blackout. Okay? Then the other spectrum, and this is what we'll dive a little deeper into, very, very useful insights for the everyday healing journey of life. The spectrum of traumatic response can also happen in the mind through our thoughts. And only when the thoughts are responded to or acted upon is there then a neurophysiological arousal in relation to traumatic response. And so along the spectrum of activation of traumatic response, the attached parts, for example, are most likely to have backdrop daydreams about social interactions. And so this is so fascinating to me, and I still experience this, and it's very fascinating because it feels like just a very normal thing. It feels like just an average, I'm looking forward to interacting with a person, or I'm imagining how good it would be to interact with a person. And so it seems very casual and innocent and not important and whatever. But recognizing that it's a traumatic response is important, because if I can recognize the early thoughts and respond there, then I can prevent a more intensive traumatic response being activated in the moments to come. Okay, so it's really important. It gives us a lot more power when we can recognize the early signs through, very casual, simple passing by thoughts, because if we can catch the traumatic response there, we can help it not become flared and become like this full-blown episode where our neurophysiology is completely in a traumatic state, and then we're reliving traumas and all these things are being activated, and then our brain and body are not in a place where we can consciously respond. We literally lose an aspect of our consciousness when we're in a traumatic response. We don't have full presence or power within ourselves. And so recognizing the early signs can really help us reclaim our power, because we can respond while it's still in a place for us to choose our response. And so the attached parts along the spectrum are where I'm starting to explain this concept. So recognizing attached parts in thoughts can look like simple, innocent daydreams about imagining social engagements. Like maybe there was someone I met a couple months ago, and this person, it was a positive interaction. I enjoyed the conversation. And then I'm over here and I start to have these daydreams where I'm drifting from my present moment a little bit, and I'm imagining like running into this person at the grocery store, and I'm like, oh man, it's so good to see you. It's been a while. And the backdrop of my consciousness is just like imagining this very like simple, innocent, casual encounter with this person. That is the beginning of a traumatic response. Wild, right? It doesn't look like it, it doesn't feel like it, but that's exactly what's happening within my neurophysiological applications of consciousness. So what's happening there is there's a part of my consciousness who senses a lack of safety, who senses a lack of solidified identity and grounded presence within the current experience of life, and begins to reach out for help by trying to create social engagements, because social engagements can help regulate the nervous system. They don't always, but the whole thing about the nervous system, according to the polyvagal theory, is that the two ends of the spectrum that we talked about a little bit ago here, the mobilization with fear and the immobilization without fear, those ends of the spectrum are what are called socially disengaged. Those other ones in the spectrum, the immobilization without fear, where intimacy is most likely, and then the social engagement here in the middle, and then the mobilization without fear, where you're most likely to be competitive, these three states are considered social engagement states. So if we're socially engaged, and again, this is referring to the polyvagal theory. Social engagement can look like a lot of different things in life. But in relation to these terms right here, these three states of the autonomic nervous system are considered socially engaged. When we're in a traumatic response, we're socially disengaged. And so the whole thing about attachment development during early childhood is that social engagement that experience of a child and a caregiver bonding regulates the nervous system and trains the body how to work. Attachment development during early childhood shapes the neurophysiological development of our brain-body system. Our brain and body don't learn to do their things without social engagement and social bonding through attachment development. And so the style in which that attachment development happens affects the way that our neurophysiology is wired from a very early age. And so we have power, though, here and now today, because our brains are always being rewired. Every single day, our brain is experiencing some manner of being rewired. And so we can heal our attachments by loving ourselves, by engaging ourselves socially. And I did a lot of my healing work in that arena through mirror meditations, where I would sing to myself and just express love. And I would use a lot of like facial expressions in the mirror to connect with my own unconsciousness and re-engage it in a gentle way. And so regardless of how our attachments had developed during early childhood, regardless of our present neurophysiological wiring, we always have power to reclaim how the wiring unfolds from this day moving forward. We may not have had the power to choose how it was wired in the past, but the past is not here. We are here now in the present, and we have the power to choose the direction of our neurophysiological wiring moving forward. It's a big responsibility, but with that, there's a lot of power, okay? So, attachments. So attachments and social bonding, social engagement help regulate the nervous system. The nervous system is covertly starting to become dysregulated because of unconscious traumatic flares, whether it's the activation of a memory or the activation of a sensation or the activation of a neurophysiological, traumatic arousal response. There's a few different things that could be happening unconsciously, but regardless, as soon as that starts to happen, as soon as there's this little hint of disengagement, this little hint of dysregulation, our attached parts are going to be like, oh, it's time. It's time to be socially engaged so that we can keep this thing under wraps. It's time to reach out. It's time to cry for help because that's my job. I look around and I cry for help is the term for the traumatic response in relation to the attached parts. They cry for help before things get to the fight, flight, freeze, fold places. But their cry for help might not be a cry, and it might not be for help. It might just be, I want to be socially engaged. Let me phone a friend. It might be proximity seeking behavior. It might be, let me just stand a little closer to this person. It might be, let me move rooms so I'm a little closer to the sounds of people. It might be, let me phone a friend because I just want to hear their voice. It might be a backdrop daydream, imagining a social engagement encounter. And so there's nothing wrong with any of these things happening. They're clues of consciousness, though, and it's important to tune in with the reason they're happening. There's nothing wrong with seeking out help from a friend. There's nothing wrong with these things, but tuning into the awareness about why we're wanting to do these things or why these urges and impulses and desires are arising is really important. It's important for us to have power in a response. It's important for us to have the tools and awareness to be there for our unconsciousness or our subconscious aspects or subconscious parts, however you want to phrase it. It's important for our health and well-being because we want to be able to be self-reliant. Like, there's nothing wrong with seeking help and doing the things we need to do to be okay. But in the long run, we want to be able to provide these things for ourselves. Down the road, like, we want to be able to be the things we need to regulate. We don't want to be dependent on other people because then that gives them our power rather than us having the power inside of us. So do what you got to do, to regulate in the here and now, but maybe explore an intention of, okay, I'm going to seek help now, but the intention is someday I'm going to be able to regulate myself. Someday I'm going to be able to have all the power and I'm not going to need to give it to other people. So that's the attached response. It's going to be some kind of seeking for social engagement, whether it's proximity seeking behavior or, and that just means trying to be closer to people. Like, one of the things I would do was watch a certain TV program because just witnessing people engaging helped me be socially engaged in my neurophysiology. And so for me, it was watching TV a lot or changing rooms of where I was hanging out so that I was closer with people and I could just hear the sounds of people, or, calling a friend. Like, those are some of the things that I've experienced. And then the backdrop daydreams, as well, of like, just like an aspect of my unconsciousness almost having this daydream about a social interaction that was not presently happening. So those are some of the things that I've experienced with this attached response, along the spectrum of traumatic response in relation to our mind and our thoughts and stuff. And when it happens there, if we can effectively respond and redirect and regulate when we notice the thoughts in the mind, we can reduce or prevent the body from becoming fully aroused in that traumatic state. So there's a lot of power in recognizing this. Okay. So along the spectrum, I actually skipped one. So let me backtrack. So there's the spectrum, right? We went through all the different ones. Here's the more lucid ones. Here's the more unconscious ones with severe traumatic responses. So the one right before attach response here, the one right before attach is what I call a normal response. And that's where you're present and you're lucid, but you're not fully grounded. Okay. And so when I've experienced this aspect of traumatic response, it really does not feel like a traumatic response at all. What it looks like is a lot of external focus, and what's happening is avoidance of the internal occurrences unfolding. And so maybe there's something starting to be activated within me, and my body brain system is like, all right, if we can just stay busy out here, then we don't have to deal with what's in here. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So again, there's nothing wrong with experiencing these things. There's nothing wrong with, acting on the urges or impulses, but awareness matters, because the more we can recognize the traumatic responses and respond accordingly, the more power we have within them, and to heal them and to recover from them, etc. So in a normal response, what I call a normal response, I might be really, really focused on my external world and really, really neglecting my internal world. It might look like dreading or avoiding, eating or exercising or any kind of physical self-care, because I just don't want to be connected with my body. And it looks like a lot of focusing on anything I can do with the mind. Like, okay, let me type this draft for this article, or let me go do a chore for my family, or let me go something. Basically, just busy work. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with it. Cleaning is important, doing work is important, but it's about the reason why this is coming up, the reason why I want to do this. Because if I'm cleaning to avoid being present with my body, that's very different from cleaning because I enjoy taking responsibility for where I live. Like, those are very different intentions. And the intention matters, because intention and attention single-handedly determine the activation and wiring of our brain's neural networks. So the manner in which, take a breath, the manner in which our brain's neural networks are being activated, and then the manner in which they're continuing to experience the rewiring that's happening every single day of our lives. Our brains are always being rewired every single day in our experience. And memories, another little side note here, memories do not stay the same. Every time they're activated, they're being rewired. So every time a memory is remembered, it's changing within our neural networks. And so this is pretty fascinating, because that means any and every time we're recalling something, the memory is being rewritten, reprogrammed, rewired in our brain. And this means that memory recall is not always reliable. The general specifics, they're pretty accurate, but the particular perspectives of the memory might be pretty subjective. And that can bring us some hope, because it can allow us to know that there's another way of perceiving these memories. And maybe if we can get to that vantage point, there will be less pain. Something that I've kind of used in my own trauma recovery. And then another little aspect of this that brings a lot of hope is any memory that's coming up has the potential to be reprogrammed, has the potential to transform so that it's remembered differently. And this is also a concept I've worked in. I've very specifically reprogrammed 27 years, 26, 27 years of memories through thousands of hours of self-hypnosis, gone into the memories and reprogrammed them. So I've worked with this a lot, a lot. And it might sound scary and it might sound impossible, but there's hope. Just know that there's hope, okay? So back to what I was saying, traumatic response spectrum. When there's the normal response, it's going to look like a lot of external focus with the particular intention, conscious or unconscious, to avoid being connected with the body. Okay, continuing along. Okay, just had to grab a sip of water. Okay, so along the spectrum, we've got the fully lucid, fully present, fully grounded state, and that's where there's no response. And then we got the normal state, or normal response, where it's present and lucid, but not fully grounded. And then we've got our attached response we talked about. The next one is the flight response. And this is actually the response that I was living in for many, many years without noticing it was related with trauma. Because once it gets farther along the spectrum, it can sometimes be a little bit more obvious that it's related with traumatic stress. But up until this point, it can be very covert and feel like it has nothing to do with trauma. Very, very sneaky. It's a very, very sneaky response, it is. So the flight response, one way to describe it is it can look a lot like mania, where, and this is why one of many reasons why a lot of people are misdiagnosed with a mood disorder when it really has to do with traumatic stress being trapped in the body. So flight responses can look like having a lot of ideas at once, feeling impulsive, feeling overly excited. And so this one took me a long time to distinguish and differentiate, because I was like, excitement is a good thing. I feel jazzed about life, but it's not just, I feel excited and joyous. It's, I feel excited. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's much more mania type of excitement. And what's happening is there's nervous system dysregulation and or brainwave dysregulation. And so things are happening a little faster than usual or whatever. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but recognizing that it's related with a traumatic response is important, because if we just continue on with it being the normal, things will get more dysregulated, and then there will start to be more activations of traumatic memories and other traumatic responses. And so if we can recognize it when it's in these earlier stages of, us actually being present with the experience and it not seeming like a traumatic response, we'll have more power within our response to help reduce the dysregulation, reduce the flashbacks that come up, reduce the potentials for other traumatic responses becoming activated within our mind and or body. And so the flight response can look like, impulsivity, or just being a high energy excitement that may sometimes look or feel a little bit like mania. Having a lot of ideas come all at once. Having so many things that you want to do that you can't really decide which route to go, or maybe you jump from project to project and you never really get any of them done, and you're just like constantly moving from one thing to another without being fully present with any of them. It can look like, and the impulsivity too can look like a lot of different things. It could just look like having an idea like, oh, I feel like going out for a hike today, or oh, I feel like going to visit a friend, or I just feel like going somewhere. I just feel like I need to be somewhere else. So again, nothing wrong with this, nothing wrong with going for a hike, nothing wrong with going for a drive to see a friend, but why is this thing happening? Why is this urge arising? And if I act on it, will I become more dysregulated? Because it's coming from a traumatic flight response, not a genuine desire from my grounded self. Very tricky, very, very tricky. And so when I'm like hanging out here and I'm like, oh man, I really just want to like get on a plane and go see my friend like right now. the idea might feel fun and it might feel simple and casual and innocent, but it's actually a traumatic response very slowly becoming activated within me. And if I continue to think about the idea or act on the idea, my dysregulation will increase. But if I can recognize, oh, I'm actually okay being right here. I'll see my friend someday. I don't need to rush into this right now. If I can redirect myself to the present moment, I will reduce the dysregulation and reduce the potential for other traumatic responses, including implicit projections that become flashbacks and including more severe traumatic responses along the spectrum within mind or my body. So, what else can come up? It's kind of those things. Anything that's like rushing to another moment is a good way to summarize it. Anything that's like rushing to another moment. Like, I'm here, I kind of get that, but I like really want to be over here. Anything that's rushing to another moment. So different ideas or wanting to be in a different place or things like that. Different projects, different places, different people, different things. Anything that's, I want to rush to something else, basically. That's the flight response, being very covertly activated in our mind. And again, the mind happens in our thoughts, and this happens sometimes like before the bodily responses. And so if we have a thought of something like this, one of these experiences of traumatic response in our mind, only if we respond to or act on that thought impulse will the unconscious neurophysiological traumatic response become activated in the physical body. Okay. So that's the flight response. Anything that's rushing to another moment might be impulsivity, different ideas, a high excitement, wanting to move to another place of experience. I just like that feeling for me is like, I just want to go somewhere. I just want to be somewhere else and have something else be happening. And so again, it doesn't feel like it's related to traumatic response at all. It feels like I'm just excited and want to go have an adventure. And there's nothing wrong with having adventures, but is the reason I want to go have an adventure because I'm here and I'm enjoying life and I'm looking forward to all that it has to offer? Or because a part of me is actually having a traumatic response become activated? Those are very different intentions. So uncovering these clues of consciousness and exploring the reasons they're arising is really important on a variety of levels. Okay, moving right along. And next we've got our fight response. And this is where things start to be a little bit more associated with trauma. Like in the rest of the responses, there's like, I'm usually able to be like, okay, this might be related to a traumatic response. Like up until this point, everything's very covert. Like it's really hard to be like, oh, that's trauma related. What? Like it doesn't click naturally. So the rest of these are a little bit more obviously associated with traumatic response. But again, not always. They're very, very secret, very covert, very clever, very, very, very stealth, very cunning, very sly. That was the word I was like, slick and sly. So the fight response. This one can look like irritability or agitation or frustration or becoming upset very easily. Like one of the ones I experienced that's again doesn't seem super trauma related, it just feels like a regular emotion or whatever, is if I get frustrated easily. Like if I'm trying to do something, I don't get it right the first time, or I mess something up, or I spill something, or I break something, or like something just doesn't go optimally well. And I immediately feel very frustrated and very angsty and very just that's the sign of a fight response becoming activated for me. Because fully grounded, present, lucid me is just like, no use crying over spilled milk. Like things happen, we move through them. This isn't going to matter an hour or a week or a year from now. I'm not going to worry about it. But when I'm not fully in that place over here, then this can happen. And when the fight response becomes activated, I'm very irritable, very easily frustrated, very easily upset, very easily agitated. I can get a little angry, which isn't my normal self, my fully lucid, grounded, present self. Doesn't really get angry. Like, it's allowed, but it doesn't really happen. And so when I'm feeling those things, that's a big clue for me as I follow the clues of my own consciousness in my healing journey, that somewhere within me a fight response is starting to become activated, and that's something I need to address. And so it can look like just, becoming irritable or frustrated or angry or easily upset. Another way that it can show up in our thoughts is through defensiveness, argumentativeness, or preparing defensive or argumentative responses. And so let's see if I can come up with an example. Okay, so if I'm walking past a person who has triggered me in the past, let's say, this person maybe just not picked a fight, but got on my case about something or whatever. If I walk past this person and my mind starts to come up with potential defensive responses in case this person does this thing again, that is a clue of consciousness indicating a fight response becoming activated in my mind. And again, the traumatic responses in the mind precede the traumatic responses in the body a lot of the times. So if I'm walking past this person or whatever, and the backdrop of my mind is preparing a defensive response in case this person tries to say something, that's a clue of consciousness indicating a fight response. Again, very covert, doesn't seem directly related with trauma, yet it is. It's associated with the traumatic responses tucked away in the neurophysiology of our brain-body system. Important to recognize. Plus, we have more space to validate ourselves. If we're walking around with this agitation all the time, we're just oh man, I'm just a really irritable person. No, you're not an irritable person. There's a traumatic response in your brain-body system that's crying out for your help. It creates space to be a friend to ourselves, to understand ourselves, to have self-compassion, and to have power in our response along our everyday healing journey of life. So that's the fight response: irritability, agitation, frustration, being easily angry, easily upset, and then that argumentativeness or defensiveness, internally or externally. Okay. I know. Oh, another way to describe that is feeling like you're always in debate mode. Like when there's a when there's a fight to response gradually become activated with my mind preceding my neurophysiological traumatic response arousal states, it'll feel like I'm just always ready to have a debate. Like, bring it on, guys, I'm ready. I got the facts, I'm going to spit them out, I'm going to show you down, I'm going to defend my position. It feels like I'm constantly ready for a debate. That's another way to perceive that. So those are all clues of consciousness. Moving right along. The next response along the spectrum of traumatic response is the freeze state, or the freeze response. This one shows up for me the most in procrastination. And so if I think about needing to do something and I immediately dread it and notice my mind trying to come up with schemes about how to avoid having to do this thing, that can be a clue of consciousness indicating a freeze response gradually becoming activated within me. Again, very covert, not necessarily directly related with trauma, yet it is associated with a traumatic response, and recognizing it as such is really important for our well-being. So freeze response can also look like not having anything to say when normally you might have something to say. Like if you're in a social engagement setting or whatever, and you may or may not notice man, I would almost like to say something in response, but you just kind of feel your body freezing up, and you can't create the words that your mind's creating, or you can't create words at all when you might otherwise be saying something. that can also be an indicator of a freeze response. I notice that sometimes where, like, I feel like a fly on the wall. I don't feel like I'm actually part of the conversation or existing in the same world as these people here. And then if someone tries to speak to me, I'm like, oh, whoa, I'm real. I forgot. That can be, from one perspective, a clue of a freeze response happening unconsciously or within the consciousness. Procrastination can look like that. I think those are the main ones I've noticed in my thoughts. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And just to clarify, this spectrum of traumatic response is something that I've created from research, both externally in relation to neuroscience and trauma recovery and stuff, and internally exploring my own unconscious processes and stuff. And so I've never seen this spectrum anywhere. It might exist, I don't know. But what I'm describing are all concepts I've kind of cultivated from my own internal and external research. Just to like clarify that. This info might be out there somewhere, but I've never seen it along a spectrum in quite this way. So for whatever it's worth. So the next one is the fold response. This is where the dorsal vagus nerve becomes activated and the body starts to feign death. What does that mean? Very much like an opossum or possum. Possum, opossum. Possum, opossum. When possums get scared, they play dead. And sometimes they'll even let out a really smelly odor as if their body is dead. And if an animal is trying to attack them, they're going to be like, I don't want this dead thing, and leave them alone, and then they're safe. And they're going into a vagus collapse when that happens, or a dorsal vagal activation in that occurrence. And so human beings also have that ability. It doesn't look quite the same as an opossum because we're people, but the nervous system style of activation is very similar. Our body feigns death. This is where oxygen deprivation can happen. If someone stays in a dorsal vagal state chronically, like months or years kind of a thing, then the body will start to experience oxygen deprivation because the body's literally playing dead from one perspective. And so the oxygen intake is reduced, the heart rate is reduced, there can be chronic bradycardia, which is a low heart rate, things like that. And so in this state, I've noticed fewer thought forms and more bodily postures in relation to clues of consciousness for this. And so one of them is being curled in. And so like, let me turn this up so I can see what I was doing. So instead of like sitting up like this, I might be like this, just curled in, head extended out and down, shoulders curled in, spine maybe curled a bit instead of being straight. So if this is like a normal posture, a fold posture would be like this. And so I noticed this clue more in physical posture than in thought forms. One thing that can happen though is things feeling almost underwater, where things just aren't really fully being processed and everything's just like not actually existing in reality or whatever. That's something that I've noticed that can happen somewhat in relation to this response. Yeah, it's a little trickier because it's a very intense traumatic response where these other ones, you can notice them in your mind before it happens in the body. But once the fold response is happening, it's happening in the body from what I've observed and everything. So that one's a little trickier to catch in the early signs and respond to accordingly. But if there was one way to notice it, it would be through posture from what I've learned. And then the last one along the spectrum that I've developed to explain a lot of the things that I've learned over the years is the blackout response. And this is where multiple traumatic responses are being simultaneously activated. And so you might have, there might be like all of these argumentative, defensive thoughts ready to engage in a debate with high agitation and irritability. There might be a variety of impulses to go do these things, go to these places, go to these things. There might be the impulse to phone a friend and to proximity seek. There might be just a complete blank state of I can't do anything. There might be curled in and you know, having hypoventilating. It's the opposite of hyperventilating. You might have multiple of these responses being activated simultaneously. And when there's all of this stuff happening, especially when it's a physical, neurophysiological response in the body and not just thoughts happening in the mind, there's reduced access to conscious thought, conscious choice, and conscious response due to limited blood flow in the prefrontal cortex and limited engagement in the frontal lobes. And so that's why I call that a blackout, because you're not fully present for it. You might not even remember it later on. And I've experienced many of these in my life, and they're very scary. They're very, very scary. So recognizing these early signs helps, because if we can catch these clues in the mind before it gets to these really gnarly, intensive neurophysiological arousal states in relation to traumatic response, you know, we can reduce the terror. We can have more power in our response. We can regulate before it gets to that point of severity, etc. So this video is a little longer than I intended, but I wanted to get this out there because it's really, really important. It's really helpful, and it's not talked about a lot. And having these insights and awareness can make a world of difference along this everyday healing journey of life. Recognizing the clues of consciousness is really important. And when we can tune in with what's happening with compassionate awareness and start to choose our responses instead of just going with the automated reactions of our neurophysiology, we reclaim our power in profound ways. We rewire our nervous system. We rewire our neural networks. We actually start to rewire our brain's memories, unconscious memory systems. Even when we're not directly working with memories, we're reprogramming our memory system because our brain body are making new memories every day. And if we start to move through our days with deeper awareness and deeper regulation and deeper presence and deeper openness with compassion to follow these clues of consciousness, we're creating new memories in our brain and body system of regulation and peace and presence and okayness and well-being and hope and all of these really good healing things. And so we can start to transform our memory systems. We can cultivate deeper self-love. We can have so much more compassion for who we are and what we're going through and where we are and where we've been and where we want to go. We can, I was totally going to say something. It slipped my mind. Cultivate deeper self-love. We can cultivate, deeper self-trust. That was what I was going to say. Cultivate deeper self-trust, because when we can start to really depend on ourselves, because we know that we're there for ourselves, and when we can feel like we can be there for ourselves because we understand what's happening and what to do about it, we start to trust ourselves. And that makes so much difference in the world. Like, I remember a time where I did not trust myself. And there was just a lot of fear in my being because I didn't know if I could count on me. I didn't know if I could count on me. But now that I trust myself, there's a lot more peace in my being, because I know that whatever comes up, whatever happens, whatever I go through, I can depend on me to move through it, because I've proven to myself that I can do it. I've proven to myself that I can be there for me. I've proven to myself that I mean what I say to me. I've proven to my unconscious aspects that I am trustworthy. And that inner trust really makes a world of difference. Really, really gives us a lot more power to move through life. So, a lot of benefits, a lot of healing journey pros. We regain a lot of power because we start to have more awareness about what is happening, why it's happening, and how to respond within unfolding life experience. Okay, I think that wraps it up. Thanks for sticking with me. If you made it to the end of this video, I'm so proud of you for rising up into your personal power by lovingly befriending the miraculous consciousness that carries you. You are not defined by your neurophysiological wiring. You are not defined by the trauma you've experienced. You are not defined by any of your experiences. You are not defined by the natural states of your nervous system. You are not defined by the manner in which your attachments developed as a child. You are not defined by your thoughts. You are not defined by your feelings. You are not defined by anything you go through. You are so much more. At the core of your consciousness, you are love, light, and infinite miracles. You are light in your conscious awareness, you are love in your subconscious realms, and in your unconscious states, there are infinite miracles. And these are the 3 layers of human consciousness that we all have, we all experience. When we can reclaim power within these 3 realms, we don't just reclaim power over our health, we reclaim power in all of our lives. Healthy relationships, dream chasing, well-being, infinite moments of happily ever after, plus good mental well-being and whatever. There's infinite potentials within this magical, miraculous, everyday healing journey of life. I love you. I believe in you. If you'd ever like to get together one-on-one in a consciousness consultant call, I really appreciate the chance to offer my healing services to the world. When we get together on a consciousness consultant call, we dive deep into helping you befriend the magical, miraculous consciousness that carries you. We lovingly and gently explore where you are, what you've been experiencing. We identify your clues of consciousness. And then we explore why they're coming up, and we create a very doable, tangible, loving plan of action for you to have the tools you need to respond to these clues of consciousness in the days to come so that you can be a friend to your consciousness and embrace this healing journey from a place of power. If you're interested in a consciousness consultant call, please email me at artistryofexistence@gmail.com. I would love to connect with you. I also offer some healing journey resources. They're super magical, super helpful, made a world of difference for me, and that's why I'm so excited to share them with you. One of them is a series of guided meditations, and it's 2 meditations. One is a little shorter. It's really great for just starting to cultivate the ability to be present with your consciousness in a way that doesn't feel super scary. And then the other one is a longer one, but you can always break it up and do it in different, you don't have to do it all at once. You could do a little bit here, a little bit there, whatnot. But it takes you through a very expansive journey of encountering your consciousness in a completely new way. Completely new experience of your own miraculous consciousness, diving deep using a variety of implicit languages or implicit language that I've discovered and created over the years. So if you're interested in that, you can find out more on my website or email me if you're interested. All the info and links are here in the video description below. And then I also have a Restoring Consciousness toolkit. And this is crazy awesome. It's been using things that I have been working to grow, build, and develop for years. It explains, explores, and empowers human consciousness from the inside out. It explains human consciousness through my miraculous inner being diagram of consciousness, explains how it develops, how it operates, how it impacts unfolding life experience, and then walks you through working with your subconscious parts. According to my diagram, there are 4 kinds of subconscious parts. And all of the parts are developed through experiences of love and can be healed through experiences of love. And when they're healed, they are restored to a state of love. And that heals all the different stuff in the subconscious realms. It's really powerful. And so this Restoring Consciousness toolkit walks you through working with your parts of consciousness, learning to recognize their clues of consciousness, learning to uncover their underlying fears, needs, and desires, learning to help them unblend so that their experience is not the same as their identity, that there's a little separation so that you have more groundedness in identity and more power to move through experience. And then it walks you through helping to respond to these clues of consciousness, to be there for your subconscious parts. And it walks you through all of the insights and then a very tangible step-by-step instruction. And then there's flow charts so you can very easily at a glance identify what's happening in your everyday unfolding life experience along this miraculous healing journey through life. And then it continues to take you into reclaiming your personal power, what personal power is, why it's important, where the power is within personal power, and how to harness personal power, what that looks like, what you can actually do in your everyday healing journey of life to reclaim your power, to harness the power of intention and attention, and to cultivate the 10 attributes of personal power. It talks about all of that. And then has tangible things you can actually do in your everyday healing journey of life with step-by-step instructions. And then it also walks you through Bullray, which is an original mindfulness practice that I've created that has been very powerful. I remember days where I'm like, nothing's working, what do I do? And I used Bullray, and within minutes, my entire perceptual awareness was transformed. I was experiencing more regulation. I had more presence. My parts felt safer. Like, very powerful stuff. So talked Bulray, several pages walking you through every single step of it with gentle compassion in the language of this text. And so it's got these flow charts and a healing journey guide. Really powerful stuff. So please feel free to check out the links for that below. Or if you'd like to order your copy, you can email me, Kristin Windsor, at artistryofexistence@gmail.com. And then I am coming out with a new book. It is almost done. It's very exciting. It's a healing journey playbook. So like a workbook, but with a whole lot more playing. A whole lot more playing. And it's got healing journey activities to engage yourself through this everyday healing journey of life. And they're very tangible. They're very simple. They're very easy to do. They're very fun to do. And they cultivate mindfulness and regulation and connection with these subconscious, unconscious aspects, and all of these very powerful healing things, but in a very fun, playful, and easy to grasp way. Like, it's not overwhelming, it's not daunting, it's not chore-like, it's not miserable, it's not painful, but you're still doing all of this really good healing journey work and rewiring your brain and your body while having loads of fun. So please stay tuned for that. I will be announcing that soon once I get it finished up. I wrote like 20 pages for it yesterday. It is awesome. It is so much fun. All of these practices just really breathe life into the soul along this everyday healing journey of life. I use them all regularly. I would never try to share something with you guys that I have not used in my own journey and found benefit from. So everything that I share, everything I create is from my own experience where it has always had a positive outcome and benefited my life and my neurophysiology in transformatively healing ways of loving empowerment. So I love you guys. I believe in you. Please explore my links below. Check out my offerings. If you're interested in any of them, you can email me. And I always have free content on my, my blog, my Instagram, my Facebook, YouTube, podcast, all that. So lots of free content there. And I also have a Patreon. And on Patreon, I share music and guided meditations and personalized coaching videos, things like that. So please feel free to check out Patreon if you're interested in joining our magical tribe there. I love you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing in this magical, miraculous healing journey of life. I deeply believe in you. I believe in your healing journey. I believe in the magic of your being. I believe in the power that you secretly have hidden within your energy. I believe in you, and I'm rooting for you. The best is yet to come, and we have only just begun. This healing journey invites us all. I hope you have a beautiful and blessed day, soul friends. I love you, I thank you, and I believe in you. Namaste. The miraculous warrior in me sees and honors the miraculous warrior in you. I'll see you next time, soul friends.